Trigger warning, you might want to scroll. Even if you think you love scary stories, I'm telling you, this one has to do with possession. I debated even reading it to you guys. It's that scary. So, just a trigger warning, but I'm also going to say I do not claim any negative energy from reading it. So, warning, let's get into it. Reads, Hi Casey, I wasn't going to send this, but after watching your page and especially the last story you posted, it just felt like it brought everything back to me. I don't really talk about this. I don't want to use my real name or my cousin's, so I'm just going to call her Claire. This was when I was growing up in Tennessee. The house that I lived in itself was already kind of off, even before my cousin Claire moved in, not in a necessarily dramatic way, just small things that never really made sense. There was this stretch between the bedrooms that always felt colder than the rest of the house, like not just a little bit colder, like you'd feel it the second you stepped into it. My parents just said it was airflow, but it didn't matter what the temperature was set to, it never changed. You'd hear footsteps at night sometimes when everybody was already in bed, slow, steady. It seemed like somebody would just walk from one end of the house to the other, and if you sat up and listened, it literally would stop. There was this one step on the stairs where it always felt like somebody was right behind you. I used to skip that step every time because I hated it so much, but I just convinced myself it was my OCD. We all just kind of got used to it. Then Claire moved in. At first, she was completely normal. We got close really fast. She had grown up farther away and we didn't get much time together when we were younger. But now she'd stay in my room, we'd watch stuff, talk late. There was nothing weird about her at all. But after a few weeks, things started changing. She stopped sleeping normally. She'd be up all night walking around, and during the day, she barely talked. My mom thought she was just stressed or adjusting because this was a very new situation, but the house felt different too. The footsteps at night got more frequent, louder. Sometimes it sounded like they were right outside of my door, and Claire started doing this thing where she would just stand outside of my room. Just stand there. Not knocking, not on her phone, nothing, standing there. I'd open my door and she'd look at me like she forgot why she was there. Then she would just say, Never mind, and walk away. But her face looked off when she did it, like she wasn't fully there. One night, I woke up because I heard talking in my room. I thought I left something playing, but when I sat up, Claire was standing in the corner of my room, in the dark, pitch black, facing the wall, talking quietly like she was having a conversation with somebody. I said her name. She stopped instantly, like mid sentence. She turned around really slowly and just stared at me. No reaction. She just said, I thought you were asleep, and walked out. After that, I started noticing more. This part is going to sound crazy, but I swear to God, she would answer things that I had not said out loud yet. She would even finish my sentences before I started them. Sometimes her voice even sounded slightly different. Not enough that somebody who didn't know her would notice, but enough that I did. My parents started to argue about it. My mom wanted her to talk to somebody, but my dad just kept brushing it off. But I knew something wasn't right because of the basement. We didn't really use it, but you could hear things down there sometimes, like something shifting or lightly hitting walls. One night, I heard something fall, and I went to check. The lights were off, but I could see her down there, standing in the middle of the room, completely still, facing nothing, but whispering. The weirdest part was it didn't sound like English, and she wasn't bilingual. It didn't even sound like actual words. I don't know how to explain it. It was very low, steady sounds. It was almost as if she was repeating something over and over. I stayed at the top of the stairs. I didn't go down. But then she stopped. Without turning around, she said my name, quiet, like she knew exactly where I was. I went back upstairs. I was so frightened, I locked my door. A few weeks later, my aunt came and got her. There was no explanation, no goodbye. She just left. My parents acted like it was normal and like she just needed to go home. I tried texting her after, calling, nothing. Eventually, her number stopped working, her accounts disappeared. We're completely no contact now. But she was never the same before she left, not even close. And the house? It went back to how it was before, quiet, but still a little off. Like whatever had been happening settled down after she was gone. But I don't necessarily think it left, because a while after she moved out, I woke up one night with that same feeling I used to get on the stairs, like someone was right behind me, except I was in bed, and I could hear something in my room. Not footsteps this time, just quiet breathing from the corner, the same corner that Claire had stood in. I don't know if something was actually there. I don't necessarily think Claire brought something into the house. I think it was already there, but it seemed like it was just waiting for somebody to notice it, and it happened to be her. Anyways, thank you for reading this and sharing stories like this. It honestly made me feel a little less crazy writing it out. First of all, I want to thank you so much for submitting. I've not had a single submission that had anything to do with actual potential possession. That's a topic that absolutely terrifies me, interests me at the same time, but is actually terrifying. If any of you have had something similar happen and you want me to share it on here, feel free to go to the email that is in my bio. Send me your story. You're more than welcome to use your identity. Some people do, other people want to remain anonymous. I respect both options. I want to know your guys' thoughts in the comments. This one had me really thinking all day.
This girl emailed me and told me that there was a mimic in her aunt's house that was mimicking her aunt's voice, and she ended up seeing this thing. So when Kaylee was in high school, her and her sister would go to her aunt's house for the summer. When she turned 16 years old and her sister was 18 years old, her aunt moved to a farm. That summer, they got really excited to go to help around the farm, to see the animals, etc. Now, her and her sister had a room that they would share in this house. And she said that the first few weeks that they were there, everything was fine. She would occasionally get this feeling of dread, but she would kind of just shake it off as to her not being comfortable in a new house. However, that feeling ended up being valid. And what happened in this house was an experience that she will never forget. So one night, she goes to bed and she wakes up in the middle of the night and her heart is racing and she's sweating and she's terrified for some reason. She doesn't know why. She looks over at the clock and it's 3 a.m. She does, however, realize that she is thirsty, and so she quietly gets up to go get water from the kitchen. So she goes down into the kitchen. She's grabbing the water. The water is running when suddenly she hears Kaylee. So she's startled at this point, but she thinks that it's her aunt because it's in her aunt's voice. So she turns around and nothing is there. So at this point, she thinks that her brain is just playing tricks on her. So she quickly drinks the water and she goes to put it down in the sink. And as soon as she goes to put it down, she hears this very slow walking coming down the hallway. Just like boom, boom, boom. This feeling of dread that she had earlier is now 10 times worse. So she closes her eyes and she's just telling herself, as she's hearing this walking slowly come closer to her, nothing is there, nothing is there, nothing is there. And then she quickly opens up her eyes and she runs down the hallway and she jumps in her bed and gets underneath the covers. As she's underneath the covers, she starts hearing that slow walking again, and it's right outside of her bedroom door, and it's just walking up and down the hallway, and it's saying, Kaylee, Kaylee, in her aunt's voice. She said that this went on all night long. She does fall asleep though, and she wakes up at around 8 o'clock in the morning. Her sister is still asleep, but she can hear her aunt in the kitchen. So she goes into the kitchen to say good morning to her aunt, and her aunt says her normal good morning, and then her sister gets up and her sister walks into the kitchen. And then her aunt looks at both of them and she goes, what were you two doing up last night running around? At this point, Kaylee's stomach just drops, and then her sister replies, I was asleep. So Kaylee looks at her aunt. She tells her aunt what happened. And her aunt just looks at her and just goes, that didn't happen. Like, she doesn't believe her at all. And then she tells her, don't talk about that anymore. She said for the next week, this would happen. She would fall asleep. She would wake up at 3 a.m. She would hear her aunt walking slowly down the hallway and calling her name. It would be like whispering, like, Kaylee. She's the only one experiencing anything at this point, so she truly thinks that it's just her imagination. Until the weekend of the 4th of July. They do their normal celebration. They have a barbecue, fireworks. Well, at one point in the night, everybody except for her and her sister end up leaving, and they go out to do something. And so it's just her and her sister at home. So they decide that they want to watch a movie in the living room. So they start watching the movie. They're about 45 minutes into the movie, and it's about 10:30 at night, when suddenly Kaylee hears, Kaylee, in her aunt's voice. She immediately freezes. But then she chooses to ignore it. But then she hears it again, and it's a little louder. And then she hears it again, but it's a little louder than the time before. Just getting louder and louder until it's like, Kaylee! After that last loud one, her sister slowly turns her head to Kaylee and says, that's not Tracy. Tracy is their aunt's name. So Kaylee goes, you heard that? And she goes, I've been hearing it every single night since the first night we got here. Well, they decide that the only thing to do is to ignore it and turn up the volume on the TV. So that's exactly what they do. And the voice actually stops. Well, a couple hours pass and they decide that they're going to go to bed. So they walk upstairs, they go into their room, and they're just chilling in their room when suddenly they hear the front door open and they hear their aunt go, hey girls, I'm home. Now, Kaylee said that it sounded like her, but something was off and she just immediately feels dread. Well, her sister gets up to go open the door, and right before she goes to touch the doorknob, Kaylee goes, don't open that. That's not Tracy. So her sister stops and she slowly turns around and starts walking towards the bed when they hear, girls! And then they hear, boom, boom, boom. These insanely loud footsteps that are walking towards their room. Absurdly loud. And then just like that, the door opens and the footsteps stop. And then her aunt really her aunt, calls out, Kaylee, Jessica. Now they're just kind of frozen in their room. They don't really know how to even respond to this. So their aunt comes into their room and she sees that they are both pale as ghosts hiding underneath the covers. They're literally shaking. They're so scared. And they tell her what happened. And this time she sits down and she tells them something different than she had told them prior. She tells them that since the second week she moved in there, she has been experiencing the same thing, but it stopped right when the girls got there. Now, her aunt at this point is like, listen, I'm worried for your safety at this point. I don't think you should be here anymore. So she calls their grandma and tells their grandma to come pick them up. But Kaylee said that what haunts her more than anything that happened at that house that summer was what happened this night. That night, they all sleep in her aunt's room. She wakes up in the middle of the night. You guessed it, it's 3 a.m. So she sits up and she starts rubbing her eyes. And as she's rubbing her eyes, she feels on the side of her face. Mind you, she is on the left side of the bed, on the edge of the bed, and nobody is to the left of her. And then she hears Kaylee in this sing-song voice, but it's a voice that she doesn't recognize. It's not her aunt's voice. So she tries to ignore it. But then again, another breath, but this time it's coming from right in front of her face. And then she hears Kaylee a little louder this time. Then she feels the bed on her right side shift, and then the breathing just stops. And then she hears those loud footsteps stomp to the other side of the bed. And then she hears Jessica, her sister's voice, in this whisper sing-song voice. So she slowly looks over at her sister, and that's when she sees it. It's this super tall, like 8-foot tall, large shadow thing crouching over her sister, just going, Jessica. So at this point, she's like, I cannot take this anymore. She quickly looks over to the nightstand and she turns on the light, and then everything just stops. Now, she said that she doesn't know if this was her brain making up an image because of what she was hearing, or if she actually saw something, but that she did see something. Just was it real? She doesn't know. But her sister woke up at this point too, and they stayed up for the rest of the night. They could not fall asleep. Now, she said that the next morning, her and her sister left, and that they refused to ever go back to their aunt's house, and that she won't talk about it with her sister. She won't talk about it with anybody. Nobody really talks about it. And so she still doesn't know to this day if her sister saw what she saw. So what did you guys think of this story? So creepy, right? I don't like the ending part where she was like crouching over her sister and saying her name. Ugh, the whole thing was so creepy. The slowly walking down the hall and just hearing your name being called all night long is so creepy to me. I swear, mimic stories really get me. They really creep me out. But what did you guys think the scariest part of the story was? And do you think this was a mimic, or do you think it was something else? Because that is a question to ask. And do you think that she really saw that night, or do you think she was imagining it? I think she really saw it, especially if she was experiencing everything else, and especially if her aunt was experiencing it too, that obviously there was something in that house. So why would her ears be not be playing tricks on her, but her eyes be playing tricks on her? That doesn't really make sense to me. I think she saw something. But tell me what you thought the scariest part of the story was, and also your thoughts, opinions, and questions, suggestions down in the comments.
What would you do if the elevator in your building started taking you to floors that didn't exist? This is Scared with Jess, and today's story is about a woman who said the elevator in her building one day took her to floors lower and lower. This happened when I was 22 and living in an apartment building downtown. It wasn't fancy, but it was tall enough that everyone used the elevator all the time. Mine was one of those older ones too, with the slow doors and the ugly yellowish light that made everybody look sick. I had gotten home late one night after work, and I remember it was just after midnight and I was exhausted. The lobby was empty, which wasn't that unusual, and I got into the elevator by myself and hit the button for my floor. At first, everything was normal. The doors shut, it started going up, and I was leaning against the wall, half looking at my phone, half zoning out, but not really paying attention. Then the elevator stopped. I looked up because it stopped too soon. It definitely wasn't my floor yet. The doors open, and outside was complete darkness. Not dim hallway darkness, not a light bulb out darkness. I mean pitch black, like the elevator had opened into a space with no hallway lights, no exit signs, nothing. I couldn't even make out walls. It was just black. I stood there for a second, waiting to hear something. Nothing. No voices, no hum from lights, no movement. Then the doors shut again. I remember thinking maybe there had been a power issue on that floor, or maybe the doors had malfunctioned and opened between levels somehow. Even though I don't even know if that makes sense. I was creeped out, but I was still trying to be logical about it. Then it started going up again. It moved maybe one floor, maybe less, and then jerked hard enough that I grabbed the rail. And instead of going higher, I felt it start dropping. Not a full free fall, just moving down. I hit the button for my floor again, and nothing. And then the lobby button. Nothing. It stopped, and the doors opened again. Pitch black. Same kind of darkness as before. This time, I didn't wait. I hit the door close button right away. The doors started to shut, and then right before they met in the middle, something thin and pale pushed between them. Fingers. Long fingers. Not grabbing hard, just sliding into the narrow gap at the last second. And the doors bounced back open because of the sensor. And outside was still just black. I couldn't see whoever the hand belonged to, only those fingers for that split second before they slipped back out of sight. I started screaming and hitting buttons at that point, every button I could reach. The doors closed again, and this time, nothing stopped them. The elevator started moving, down again. I was crying by then, fully panicking. I had backed myself into the farthest corner and was staring at the doors like that would somehow help. It stopped one more time, and the doors opened. Again, nothing but black, except this time I could tell there was space out there, not because I could see the floor or walls clearly, but because something shifted in the distance, something dark moving against the dark. And then I heard it, bare feet running, fast, slapping against the floor somewhere out there and coming straight towards the door. I hit the close button so hard, then the doors started coming together, and the running got louder, faster, close enough that I could tell whatever it was had almost reached the elevator. The door shut, and a second later something hit them from the other side hard enough to make the whole elevator shake. Then it shot upward, fast. So fast I dropped to my knees. It didn't stop until it reached my actual floor. The doors opened like nothing had happened. Normal hallway and lights. My floor. I ran out and pounded on my neighbor's door because I was too scared to even go into my own apartment alone for a minute. And the next day, I told the building manager, and he acted like I was confused or maybe overtired. He said the elevator had never had any issues like that. A week later, there was an out-of-service sign on it for 2 days. Nobody ever told residents why. I started taking the stairs after that, even though I lived on the 10th floor. And one night, maybe a month later, I was coming in through the lobby when the elevator opened by itself. There was nobody inside, and just for a second, before the doors shut again, I heard barefoot running from somewhere deep in the shaft. Anyway, good luck sleeping tonight.
Hello and welcome back to a series of spooky stories, The Haunted Tea Spill. This series is brought to you by all things spooky and godly amounts of paranormal activity. You already know what it is. Have been wearing it every single day. Love it. It's down here if you want. Go follow my backup account. It's tagged down here. Now onto the story. My name is Mallory and I live in eastern Kentucky, deep in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. For context, my parents put our house on the same property as my maternal grandparents, us on a hillside and my grandparents in the valley below. Walking distance between us. I have a son, my sister had a daughter, 4 years apart. Neither of our children ever had the opportunity to meet my grandparent. Just some backstory. My mother was standing at our kitchen window, which faces the road, when my son, whom is 3 or 4 at the time, proceeds to tell her that someone was at the kitchen window. What do you mean, son? Whatever do you mean? Without hesitation, my mom tells him nobody was there. He insists that there are 2 people, an older man and a woman, one with glasses and a woman in a dress. Describing my deceased grandparents to her after several minutes of nobody is there shade, my papa and son's name, he grabs my mother's phone. As he tries to take a picture, he looks at the screen and back at the phone, shrugs his shoulders, and tells my mother that they're gone. Just shrugs. Kids, man. There is no porch in front of that window. No way that anybody could be standing there. Fast forward years, my sister and niece were trying out our new ATV. My niece stops my sister in front of my grandparents' house in the valley, asks my sister who the older lady in the purple dress was, standing in the back window of the house, describing my mama perfectly, who, again, she had never met. They were determined to see them kids. My sister immediately came back to our house, white as the ghost she had just seen. Both of our children have seen visions of our grandparents, and still to this day, we all get chills retelling these stories. That's definitely creepy as fuck, but also a little bit wholesome that it's the grandparent. They just wanted to see their grandbabies, you know? Rated on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the least scary, creepy, spooky, 10 being the most. If you have a story of your own that you want to submit, you can do so on the link tree in my profile. I'll see you all the next episode. Stay spooky, friends.
Have any of you guys heard of the Alaskan Airlines Flight 261 that crashed in January of the year 2000? I was on Reddit and I came across the story. I'm going to go ahead and read it to you guys, and I want you guys to let me know what you think. The writer's name is Girl11, and it says, "This is a story that my mom has told me for years. Before I was born, my parents were stuck in the Puerto Vallarta airport trying to get back to Chicago, and their United Airlines flight kept getting delayed over and over. After hours of waiting, about 18 total, they were exhausted and sleeping on the floor. My mom had finally started begging my dad to just get on a different flight, and there was actually an Alaskan Airlines flight going to Seattle. She just wanted to get back to the US and figure it out from there." My light died. Let's continue. "My dad immediately refused and kept saying, 'I'm not getting on that plane,' which my mom always thought was weird because he was never really like that. She was sitting there crying, watching people board, wishing she was getting on that flight too. She said she noticed this little girl, probably around 4 years old, with blonde curly hair, wearing a white sundress, walking onto the plane, but she kind of looked and stared at her. My mom said seeing her weirdly made her feel better for a second, like everything was going to be okay, even though she was upset. The plane left, and eventually my parents got on a different flight home. When they landed, they found out that the Alaskan Airlines Flight 261 had crashed, and everyone that was on board had unfortunately passed. My mom said she cried for days, especially thinking about that little girl that she saw. What's always stuck with me is that if they had gotten on that flight, I would have not existed, which is already crazy, but also I've tried looking through the victims list and photos, and I can't find anyone that matches the little girl my mom described. I had never heard about this tragedy that had happened. I looked it up, and it did happen in January of 2000, and there were 88 passengers on that flight, and they all passed. Isn't that scary? Like, you were literally about to get on that plane. Your husband says no, and he actually ends up saving your life. What do you guys think?
I used to babysit for a wealthy family, but their baby didn't sleep, and that was actually the least creepy thing about him. I have reason to believe that he was something or someone much older. This spooky scary story time was submitted by Rachel, and she says back in the 1990s, she was home from school break for the summer, and she answered a White Pages ad for a family in Belmead, Tennessee that was looking for an experienced babysitter, and they required references, but they also paid extremely well. It was $20 an hour, which back then was like winning the lottery. If you're new here, this is Spooky Scary Storytime, the series where we share listeners' allegedly true stories about the creepiest or most unsettling things that they've ever experienced. And Rachel says she was 19 when this all happened. She answered the ad she knew about Belmead because Belmead is old money, like real old money, with winding streets and stone houses that look like they've been there since the Civil War, with ivy climbing up the sides. I live in Nashville. I can attest to this. But Rachel knew of the area, even though she didn't live in Belmead, because her grandmother used to clean houses in Belmead in the 1970s. She answers the ad and she calls and she leaves a message on the family's answering machine. And the family calls back the same day, and on the phone is the mother, and she sounds sort of nice, but also very professional and sharp. And the mother asks if Rachel has experience with infants, and Rachel says she does. And she says, okay, cool, it pays $25 an hour in cash. And Rachel says, oh, the ad says 20. And the woman says, okay, well, we can do 20 if you want. And Rachel's like, well, no, I'll take the 25. And she's like, I felt like I knew that money was not an issue for these people at all. But the woman says that they want to meet her before they agree to let her babysit their child, which is understandable. So Rachel goes out to their house the following day. Rachel pulls up to this massive Tudor-style mansion, and she said it had original stained windows, and when she stepped inside, it smelled like old books. There were bookshelves lining the walls. There was fine art hung in beautiful frames all over. The place was spotless. The dad answered the door, and he was gray-haired, and he looked powerful and clean-cut and important. He says, oh, my wife handles these things. And he calls for his wife, and she comes down this wooden winding staircase, and she's got a bob, and she's wearing like a power suit. Finds out that the dad is an attorney and the mother is in politics. She's not a politician, but she works with politicians. And also all around the house are photos with them with like senators, a vice president, and even some foreign leaders that Rachel recognized from the news. Said being in this house was unlike anywhere she's ever been before, and it was a lot. But they were nice enough, and they're telling her that they're looking for someone for Friday nights because they either want to have date night or they have other commitments, and can she be available? And they're always home by 10 p.m. They need her for like 3 or 4 hours every Friday. And she's like, perfect, I can make that work. And they're like, cool, let's meet the infant. Which, mind you, they called him the infant. They did not call him by name. She thinks that's a little odd, but she follows him upstairs, and they walk inside the nursery, and he's in this antique-looking crib. An 8-month-old baby boy, he's wide awake, he's sitting up in the crib, and he's got these huge dark eyes that are just staring at her when they enter the room. She walks over, she says some baby talk, like, hi, what a little cutie, or something like that. The baby did not smile, he didn't fuss, he just stared at her. And the mother kind of laughs, and she's like, oh, he's a little bit socially awkward, or something like that. She kind of explains his behavior away. And Rachel's like, okay, well, what about bedtime? Like, do you guys have him on a sleep schedule, or what's going on? And the mom says, no, he doesn't really sleep. She says, don't worry too much about bedtime. We're not really concerned about that. We'll handle it when we get home. We're always home by 10. So she goes, oh, okay, that's fine. And she goes, what's his name? And both the parents start to say a different name at the same time, and they kind of give each other a look. Mom says, oh, his name is very formal. We just call him Thomas. Which is not the real name of this child, but I'm just inserting a name for storytelling's sake. But it's something generic like that. So the dad says, does everything sound good? Can you be available this Friday? And Rachel says, sure. And he's like, perfect. We'll see you then. So Rachel pulls up at 5:45 on Friday to start her shift at 6. She walks in. The father hands her an envelope full of $200 cash for incidentals, he says, for her few hours pay and to order a pizza because he says they don't keep food in the house because they eat out a lot. She's like, perfect. They're out the door. She goes up in the room. The baby's still sitting up in his crib, just staring at her. She says she took him out. She read him a book. She played with him. And the entire time he didn't smile. He didn't fuss. He didn't make a sound. She noticed that he didn't really like to be held. It didn't seem like it anyway, because anytime she picked him up, he would sort of go stiff in her arms. And the only thing that he seemed to care about was a weird little carved pendant that he wore on a leather cord around his neck. At first glance, Rachel thought it was a teething toy. She had seen such a thing on other babies that she had babysat for, but never one that looked like this, because this was a strange little symbol carved into what seemed like stone with too many teeth and weird symbols carved into the sides. She didn't know what the symbols were, but she thought it reminded her of something from National Geographic. Like ancient hieroglyphs, but she was like, rich people buy weird things for their babies. I don't know what this is. Maybe it's an antique. This baby clung to this thing like it was his lifeline. Parents hadn't left any instruction as to how to feed him, so she goes to the kitchen and she's rummaging around, and she notices in the refrigerator there is literally just a bottle of red wine, which she thought was odd to be in the refrigerator, and some old takeout. But the dad did say that they ate out a lot, but she was looking for something to give to this baby, but she found a few jars of unopened baby food, and she tried to feed it to him, and the baby turned his head away like he didn't want anything to do with it. Eventually, when she realized that he wasn't responding to the food or any way that she was trying to play with him, she decided to sing him a lullaby, because she was like, all babies sleep eventually. But he did not. He just stared at her. Eventually, the parents got home no later than 10 p.m., as they said. They told her to keep the rest of the money, and can you be here next Friday? And she said, sure, I'll see you then. And they said, perfect, same time. Following Friday, when she arrived, she asked them about his feeding schedule, and they said the same thing. Oh, he doesn't really eat much. And she's like, he doesn't eat much? And the mom says, no, he's breastfed. It's really the only thing he likes. She's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And she's like, he's just a picky eater. That's also why he doesn't sleep. Rachel accepted this explanation because she was like, I've never raised a child myself. I don't know how this goes. But every time she watched a child from that point on, it was the same. He never ate. He never slept. He just stared at her. Over the next few weeks, she noticed a few things that seemed even more strange about this baby besides his eating and sleeping habits, which were, once he dropped his little pendant teething toy, and she picked it up and she was looking at it, inspecting it a little bit closer, and he seemed to growl at her. She said it was something guttural. It didn't seem like a noise that I've ever heard a baby make, but it really seemed to bother him that she was holding on to this toy. Another time, she had put him down in his crib, hoping that by some miracle he would fall asleep, and she closed the nursery door behind her and was walking down the hall when she heard a whispering coming from his room. She paused to listen, and it sounded like two people were talking in the room. She peeped her head back in, and he was still just sitting up in the crib staring at her. That freaked her out, but she thought she just imagined it. Another night, about 2 weeks before she quit, a man showed up at the door, and she answered the door. There was a guy standing in what looked to be an old suit. He said he was tall, he was pale, with intense green eyes, and he asked about the boy. She says, I'm sorry, I don't really feel comfortable letting a stranger in the house. The parents are gone. And he says, okay, well, tell the parents that their debt is still unpaid. And she says, okay, well, who should I tell them stop by? And he said, I'm just an old family friend. I'm just here to check on the air. They'll know who you're talking about. Before he turns to leave and get in an old town car, he says, tell them that the arrangement can't last forever. The parents get home that night. Rachel relays the message, and the parents look at each other and they seem concerned, and they say, okay, thank you for letting us know. The night that made Rachel finally quit was a Friday night about 2 weeks later when she was working, and the parents actually called the house phone, which was a landline, and they told her, hey, our charity event is running a little bit late. Are you okay with staying until 1 a.m.? Father's like, there's an extra $100 in it for you. And Rachel's like, yeah, of course. It's like 12:50 a.m. She's waiting for the parents to get home. She's sitting on the couch downstairs and the landline starts ringing, and she goes to answer it, but it stops ringing. But then she hears a separate line start ringing, and it sounded like it was coming from upstairs. And she was like, does this house have two phone lines? So she starts walking up the stairs and she realizes that the ringing is coming from the baby's room. She had noticed that there was an old rotary phone in the baby's room, but had never paid it attention. She thought it was more for decoration. She had left the baby alone, thinking maybe he would go to sleep since it was so late in the night. But she creeps down the hall, she props open the door, and she looks at the crib, and the baby's not in the crib. But instead, he's standing in the corner, standing up, which she had never seen him do, talking on the phone, and he's whispering in a language that was not English. She said, I don't know if it was Latin, but it sounded like something super old. As I'm standing there staring at this baby talking on the phone, he turns his head around 180 degrees and looks at me. What was even creepier is that he smiled for the first time since she started babysitting him. Said I could not believe what I was seeing, so I just slowly backed up. I closed the door behind me and I walked back downstairs to sit on the couch because the parents were supposed to be home within the next 15 minutes and they'd never been late before. Said she was sitting back on the couch in the living room trying to make sense of what she just saw when she heard the nursery door creak open. She looks upstairs and on the landing can see the child now walking down the hallway headed for the stairs. And then he proceeds to walk down the stairs as if he were an adult. And his eyes are locked on her this whole time, and he's smiling at her as he does it. And he gets to the bottom, and she says, what do you want? And he says, everything. She said the pendant around his neck seemed to be glowing as he said it. And said she jumped up. She didn't know what to do. She was about to make a run for it because now she's afraid of this child when the door swings open and the parents walk in and the baby drops to his knees. Went back to his normal dead stare. The mom rushes over to him. She picks him up. She's like, oh, you guys are practicing crawling. She was almost yelling at this point. She's like, he was just walking. He just walked down the stairs. And the dad looks at his watch and says, no, he doesn't walk at this hour, which is also a very strange thing to say. Dad says, sorry, we're late. Here's that extra 100 for you. And Rachel says that he probably knew from the look on her face that something was wrong because he's like, is everything okay? He says, but how do you tell someone that their child just scared you to the point of wanting to run out of the house? She called to quit the next day. They didn't ask any questions, just said that they were sorry to see her go. A few years later, she did see their family portrait in the news because they had launched a new charity organization in the state that made a bunch of headlines. But in the story, there was oddly no mention of that child, and she said she still wonders about it. She did tell her grandmother about the whole situation, who cleaned houses in the area. And her grandmother didn't seem bothered by it. She said, oh, you would not believe what I've seen cleaning those houses in the 70s. She said, those people don't make their money like you and I'll tell you that much. Rachel says that's a story that she hasn't told in years because who would believe her anyway? Common thread that the White House and FBI is looking for among the cases of the 11 missing or deceased scientists since 2023 is unlimited clean energy. And that only took me a few hours to connect the dots this morning. I could never be a teacher, and I give teachers credit, because reading these articles and then connecting the dots brought me back to grade school. And the teacher has this long-winded lesson, and they give the lesson, and then they say, does anyone have any questions? And there's a kid in the back of the class that raises their hand, and they ask a dumb question. I'm sorry, some questions are stupid. They ask a dumb question with a glaringly obvious answer, and the teacher has to spend another 20 minutes going over everything she just said to explain it to them. That's how I feel reading these articles, because all 11 of these people were tied to jet propulsion systems, to top secret research. They all had high security clearances to nuclear, military, or aerospace projects. They all worked in overlapping labs or industries, and there's so many ways to connect the dots among these people. My original thought was that I was going to make a video going over who these 11 people were, but I figure you can research that on your own. What I would like to point out is some of these people knew each other. Some of them worked together. Monica Reza, she went missing in June of 2025. She was hiking with a friend in Los Angeles National Forest. It's a popular hiking trail where they were at. Her friend's like 30 feet ahead of her. Her friend looks back at one point. She waves at him. She smiles. A couple minutes later, he looks back. She's gone. They have search and rescue. They have cops. They have everybody out there. Still have not found her. Developed and patented a specialized metal that's used on U.S. rockets. She also worked with a guy who was former Air Force Major General named William McCaslin, and he's relevant because he also went missing 6-7 months later in February of 2026, except he went missing from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and he was the former head of the Air Force Research Laboratory. And what's weird about him going missing is that he went missing with his hiking boots, his wallet, and his firearm, but mysteriously his glasses and his phone and his wearables, so I assume like his Apple Watch, were all left at home. Did a lot of research about UAPs, which is unidentified aerial phenomena, what we used to call UFOs. Why would we be so obsessed with UFOs and UAPs? Probably not because we're so concerned with the existence of extraterrestrial life, but probably because we're trying to figure out a way to figure out a next generation of propulsion technology. And why do I bring this up? Because NASA has the JPL, which is the Jet Propulsion Lab. Propulsion is literally how we move things forward. So when we move something forward, hot gas is pushed out behind it. The Jet Propulsion Lab is also obsessed with researching nuclear fusion. It produces no CO2. It's literally called the holy grail of clean energy. Why do they care about that? Because basically it just means that they can get a lot farther in space if they don't need to burn fuel. Eskridge, the scientist who officially, by her own hand in 2023, who also claimed to be having been messed with psychological warfare, which her colleagues and family also back up, was working on anti-gravity systems that were for a new type of propulsion that did not require fuel. What sits at the intersection of all of these cases and the commonality that the FBI and the White House are supposedly looking for is the fact that all of these people were working on projects to develop a new technology that, if successful, would completely flip the global energy paradigm, completely change our need for fuel. The question isn't what these cases have in common, it's who doesn't want this technology.
All right, this story is so freaking bizarre and creepy and weird. I don't know, you gotta let me know what you think. So this woman writes that she had something happen to her that she absolutely cannot explain. She got up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and she came back to the bedroom where her husband was sleeping. She explains that the bedroom had sheer curtains and a street light just outside, so there was always some light in the bedroom, even really late at night. But this night though, she said she walked in to complete darkness, despite the fact that when she left, there was a seemingly normal amount of street light coming through. She says she only took about 3 steps into this bedroom when she felt her body slam into like what felt like a half wall. Her upper abdomen hit the top of the wall hard. Reacting, she puts her arms out in front of herself and she's feeling around, but she feels only air. At first, she was very confused, and then fear began to set in. She was in utter darkness and quickly realized that there was no sound at all. She said she could not have imagined what she just walked into, as the only thing that should have been directly in front of her was the low, soft foot of the bed. So now she slowly lowers her hands and she can feel the top of the half wall, and then she wraps her hands and arms around the front of it. It was thin and the other side of it had a rough texture. She could not even imagine what this could have been. Absolutely nothing in her room would have been there or felt like that. She said this had all happened in just a few seconds, and suddenly she is realizing she has no idea where she is. It certainly didn't seem to be her bedroom. And then she said her desk should have been just a few feet to her left, so she kind of sidestepped in that direction, and she's feeling around now for her desk. And of course, that desk was not there. And now she is getting too terrified to even move. She's worried now that if she took a few more steps, she could essentially fall through. Like, is there even going to be a floor there? So finally, she forces herself to turn around again in the direction of the door that she just came through. And when she did, she could only see a few faint lines where the door frame would have been, almost like lines of light coming through the cracks. And not the whole outline, she says, just little bits. She said the light switch was next to the door, so she made herself step in that direction and feel for the switch. She feels it, she flips it on, and all of a sudden, the room is completely normal. And she can now hear her husband laying in bed, snoring loudly. And she just stands there freaking shaking. So like a minute later, her husband wakes up due to the light and he's like, what's going on? So she explained what happened and how she felt like she walked into some kind of wall, and she's gesturing down at her abdomen, and her husband sees and says, there's a spot there. So she rushes over to the mirror and she sees indeed there is a deep red mark right there where she had hit whatever that was. And then get this, by the next day, it was a dark bruise. So I already know what some of you are going to say, that she was dreaming this, but then explain the physical injuries. She said it's difficult to explain the depth of terror that she felt in that moment, when she had no idea where she was and was so afraid to move, having no idea what would happen. She says this happened 10 years ago, and she is so terrified by it, she still sleeps with the light on, as one would. All right, y'all, what in the heck do we categorize this as? Is this a glitch in the matrix, a slip into another dimension or reality? I don't know. My brain is just going into 18 different directions. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you're new here, don't forget to follow for more creepy story time.
Want to get creeped out? Have you heard of the bandaged man in Oregon? In Portland, Oregon, in the Cannon Beach area, there is allegedly a mummy-like figure that roams. He's covered in bloody bandages, barf, and smells of decay, barf again. He allegedly haunts Highway 101. He attacks slow-moving or parked cars, especially ones that have teenagers in them who are like, you know, making out at night, went to a little hideaway spot, no one's around, they're making out. The bandaged man, he's coming for you. Here's the creepiest part. He walks very strangely, as if his arms and legs aren't attached to his body. This legend began in the 1950s. The myth stating that this is the ghost of a logger who passed away in a sawmill accident, or an injured fireman, or an injured electrician. There's a lot of variants on this legend. Apparently, he will jump in open-top vehicles or in trucks, but disappear by the time the vehicle reaches town. Most don't actually notice him until his rotten stench alerts them of his presence. Ugh. He feeds on pets, small animals, and occasionally humans. Have any of you heard of this before? And has anyone ever seen him? Anyways, that's it for this one. See you next time.
Tonight's story has been sent in by someone that I actually know. Like, I grew up with them. So it has a whole nother level of just fear factor to it. Let's not waste any more time and get into the story. So they share an experience that happened to them when they lived at a house in Panmure, and it actually happened to like their daughter at the time. So she was about 2 or 3, and in this particular house that they stayed in, there were like wooden floors. So if someone was walking on these wooden floors, you would be able to hear it. So the daughter's room was a bit down the hallway from where their room was, and they made a note to say that they always left the hallway light on if for any reason that the daughter needed to wake up in the middle of the night, that she could easily find her way to her parents' bedroom. Now, the mother, like me, was a very light sleeper, so in the middle of the night she would always be woken up by the sound of her daughter's footsteps walking towards their room. So she would, you know, wait for her to come into the room and then like help her into their bed. However, one night in particular, she heard her daughter's footsteps coming down the hallway, walking towards the room, and as the mum got up to like welcome her to bed, remember guys, it is dark, it's in the middle of the night, so things aren't always as like visibly clear as what they might be during the day. So she's waiting for her daughter to come to her side of the bed, but then she hears the footsteps go over around to her dad's side of the bed. And this is where things get really, really strange. As the footsteps approach the dad's side, they stop. And he like wakes up because they both hear the baby whisper, "Dad." So he goes to pick his daughter up, but there's no one there. The daughter is not there. She's not there at all. The mum looked back at her side of the bed. The daughter is not there. So they both shot up, looked at each other to confirm it was what they had just heard. They like run down to the daughter's room, and what do they find? They find the daughter there fast asleep. They quickly scoop her up and take her back to their room because it was just too creepy to sleep alone that night. Now, I have so many thoughts as to what it could be. I want to know what you think it could have been. I mean, who is walking around in the house? What kind of spirit is imitating a baby? But we know that they do that. So if you have any similar experiences, please hit me up or drop it in the comments. But that is your story for tonight.
Is there some sort of creature wandering the woods of New York? Now, there was this man named Louise. Louise's father had befriended this Native American man who lived on the Tonawanda reservation. And he said one weekend, this friend of his father's had invited them out to the reservation to this big party that they were having. So they went there. They end up having a really good time. But as it struck 11:30, the friend of the father and his wife, they gathered everyone up. And they said to Louise and his parents, look, you need to leave right now. And it's nothing personal. It's nothing you did. But you need to leave because they are coming. And they said, okay, who is coming? They said, we cannot talk about it. But you must go to your cars, walk in the light, do not go off the road. Do not go into the woods. Just get in your car. And when you're driving off the reservation, do not stop for anyone, even if they're asking for help. And right at that moment, all of a sudden, Louise's dad's friend is like, everybody be quiet. And as it went silent, they began to hear these howls and screams coming from all around them. And so Louise's dad's friend was like, okay, everybody needs to get in the house now. So they all run inside, they lock the door, and they start hearing this howling and the screaming coming all from around the house. And there's stuff running by the windows, and they can hear these loud thumps. And this went on for about an hour of time. After about an hour, they hear a knock at the door. Boom, boom, boom. And they hear this young child's voice say, please, let me in. I'm scared. Please, just let me in. And Louise's father is kind of like, what, aren't you going to let this poor child in? And his friend says to him, look, everybody in this area knows that when they come, you stay inside your house. So whatever is out there is not human. And all night long, they were tormented by whatever this was outside the home. And when morning came, Louise's dad's friend looks at him and says, I'm sorry about that, but please do not ever talk about this again. Living next to the woods can be creepy. It's not for everyone because you will see things, you will hear things. It can get very weird. And there is a particular set of rules that if you find yourself living next to the woods or the forest, that you should follow. Now, the first rule is at nighttime, always lock your doors, always close your curtains. Also, at nighttime, never look out the window facing the woods. If you hear a knock at your door at nighttime, do not answer it, especially if it is your back door. You will see lights coming from the woods. Do not follow them. Do not try and communicate with them. Just ignore them. And the most important thing you must remember is that anything you see outside, most likely it's not real. You are not seeing it, or you are not hearing it. Now, this story comes out of Tennessee. There's this man named Christian. Christian said that at one point in time, he grew up in this farmhouse that was out in the boonies. And he said they lived deep, deep in the woods, and it was a dirt road that took several miles to get to their house. And they literally had no neighbors around. Well, he said when they first moved in, there was a lot of weird stuff that would happen. For instance, the dogs didn't want to go anywhere near the woods. They would get to the tree line and they would turn around. And it was like they were afraid of something. They also noticed these deer. They would come into their yard at night and they would just be staring out into the woods like they were scared of something. And then one night, something very strange happened. So it was about 11 o'clock at night. And on the back door, they hear boom, 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 a knock. And that's when his father goes to the back door and he opens it up. There was no one out there. He said as he looked out into the woods, he started to hear screams. And it sounded like someone was in trouble. So he said he got up and him and his father went outside and they started looking around. They couldn't see anybody. So eventually they called the police. And the police came out and they searched the area. They couldn't find anyone. Well, on a regular basis, they started hearing screams outside their house coming from the woods. And every night, something would be knocking on their back door. A few times, they found the back door wide open. The other weird thing that started happening is Christian's brother started having these weird nightmares. And not only was he having nightmares, he started to sleepwalk. And he would get up from his bed, he'd walk down the hallway into the kitchen and out the back door. And right before he would get into the woods, his dad or his mom would stop him and wake him up. And, this happened several times. Well, eventually his father put up like a camera outside because he was trying to figure out who's knocking on the back door. And one day he looks at the video and he sees his son going out the back door. And he notices he just starts looking around like he's looking for something out in the woods, like something was calling him. And finally, his father comes running out and stops him. So the father started to get really creeped out. He told Christian and his brothers and sisters, do not go out in the woods. And he said that's when one night there was a very loud banging sound coming from the back door. And it was almost like someone was trying to get in this door. So he said his father grabs a baseball bat. He goes to the back door and he opens it. And he looks around, and out of the corner of his eyes, he sees something moving in the woods. So he said his father started to make his way towards the wood line. And that's when he sees something run back further into the woods. So his father starts to go into the woods down this trail. And he said he could see this thing from a distance. And he noticed when he would kind of move, it would move. Or when he would turn to the right, it would turn to the right. Or when he would turn to the left, it would turn to the left. And he said whatever he would do, whatever movement he would do, this thing would follow. And he said that's when he realized whatever this was, it was almost like looking at a mirror. This thing was copying him. It was following his every movement. So his father turns around, takes off running through the woods, gets back in the house, and tells everyone, get in the vehicle, we are leaving. And they moved that night and left everything behind in the house. And he said still to this day, he has nightmares whenever he's near the woods because he still thinks about his time living in that place. When we think of vampires, we think of New Orleans, but the Appalachian vampire is the original American vampire. Now, what people don't understand is in the 1900s, there were Romanian immigrants who came to the Appalachian Mountains because it reminded them very much of the Carpathian Mountains. And they brought with them this lore of vampirism. Now, this story comes out of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. There was a girl named Kira. Now, Kira said that she happened to be downtown one night with her friends, and they were at this nightclub. She said, she was dancing, having a good time, when out of the corner of her eye, she spots this man standing by the bar. And she said he had this beautiful curly brown hair, and he had bright blue eyes. And she said, he was just like almost perfect looking. Well, she said, when she was dancing with her friends and she was talking with them, all she could do was focus on this guy. Eventually, she said something was compelling her to go over and talk to him. So she walks over to this guy and she goes, hi, I'm Kira. How are you? Where are you from? He doesn't say anything. She keeps trying to talk to him, but he's not speaking. So she goes, you don't really talk that much. And this guy then proceeds to grab her hands. And she said when she felt his hands, they were ice cold. And as she looked upon his eyes, she said there was this blank stare. And she said it looked like he was empty inside. And right at that moment, she has this vision of a woman screaming, and this guy is chasing her. Well, all of a sudden, she kind of snaps out of it, and she backs up a little bit and is kind of freaked out now. This guy looks at her and says, what do you think of me? And she says, well, to be honest with you, I think you're a little creepy now. And he goes, I'm sorry. I'm still trying to learn to be human. And she said the next thing she knew, she felt something telling her to go outside. So she started to walk out the front door. She goes down the road and she goes into this back alley. This guy follows her out. She said this guy came up right next to her. And next thing she knows, she's kissing this guy. And she said it was getting very passionate when all of a sudden he starts getting very aggressive. And she said he was grabbing her arm so hard he could feel the nails going into her skin. And she said, at this point she became terrified and started freaking out when she hears her friends say, Kira, are you all right? Is everything okay? What's going on? She turns, she takes off running to her friends. She's all frantic. And she says, this man I met at the bar, he was trying to attack me out in the alley. Her friends just kind of look at her like she's crazy. And she's like, what are you, you don't believe me? There seriously was this guy. And they're like, Kira, you were over by the bar alone. And you were talking to someone who there was no one there. And you walked out of the door alone. And you walked into the alley alone. There was no one with you. And she's like, no, what are you talking about? He was there. He's real. And her friends are like, look, you've had too much to drink. We're going to take you back home so you can get some sleep. So she said she went home And she started to think, maybe it was me drinking too much. Like maybe I just imagined this. Until she goes into the bathroom and she sees these scratch marks on her arm.
When I was 9, I went to a sleepover at my friend's house, and something in that house did not want me there. There was quite a few of us. We were baking cookies, playing games, being loud, the things that you do when you're little and at a sleepover. At one point, my friend casually tells us all that her house is haunted, and we just kind of laughed it off, thinking that she was joking or just trying to make things spooky. The night goes on, and we gradually end up in her bedroom, and we're laughing, giggling, whatever, until we all wind up falling asleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I remember checking the clock later on, and I'm pretty sure I woke up around 2:30 a.m., and it sounded like somebody was in the house, and I really listened, and I realized that it sounded like very heavy footsteps. They started to come up the steps, and they were really heavy, like wearing boots, and almost the boots that have like a steel toe or just some kind of metal on them, and the footsteps were dragging slightly. It was very slow and very loud, like too loud for anybody to ignore, and I looked around to see if anybody else was awake, but it was just me at that time. Eventually the footsteps hit the top of the staircase, and then I hear a couple more steps, and it reaches to outside of the bedroom door, and it just stops. And it stayed there for, I want to say, 5 minutes. They just stood there, whatever it was. The footsteps started again, back and forth in the hallway, pacing. And then they came to the bedroom door again, and all of a sudden, the loudest bang happened. It was very loud, like somebody was trying to get into the door. My friend actually woke up, and she just kind of stared at me, terrified. And you could tell both of us were just kind of frozen, and I just pointed to the door. She whispers to me, "What is that?" And I say, "I don't know." And then we hear the footsteps go back down to the hallway, down the stairs, and it goes quiet. And we didn't hear anything for the rest of that night. We fell back asleep. We woke up the next morning, and while we were eating breakfast, I asked my friend if anybody was in the house, like brothers or somebody messing with us, and she said, "No, it's just my dad here, and he's too sick to get out of bed." We told her what happened in the middle of the night, and she said, "I told you, I've heard similar things happen." After breakfast, we all went outside to go play, kind of brushing it off. We decided to play Ghost in the Graveyard in the backyard, and I go to hide behind this bush. And that's when I saw her. Laying down was a little girl about the same age. She had blonde hair. She was wearing a really, really pretty white dress, and she was barefoot. I kind of stared at her for a sec, and then I waved, and then she waved back at me, and she said, "Don't go back into that house." And I was confused, and I just pointed back at my friend's house. I asked her why, and she didn't answer, and so I asked her again, and she just said the same thing. She said, "Don't go back into that house." After that, she stood up and she ran off, and my friend came over, and she said, "Boo," and I said, "Oh, did that little girl give away my hiding spot?" And she said, "What little girl? I didn't see another little girl." She said that I was sitting there alone the whole time. I found out a couple things a couple days later that made it even worse. We found out that there had been an unaliving that happened in that house, and somebody in my friend's family was involved. And I never went back to that house again after finding that out.
In the early evening of May 7th, 2008, a 65-year-old woman named Zivana Temolkoska walked around her kitchen inside of her apartment in the little southeastern European city of Kisevo. Kisevo is a quiet place at the base of this huge mountain in northern Macedonia, and while it's totally beautiful, it's utterly remote, and basically nothing really of note happens here. Zivana cleaned houses for a living, but on this particular day, she was on a day off, and so she was just kind of hanging out at her apartment, waiting for her adult son, named Zoran, to come home. It was a beautiful, warm evening that night, and so Zivana had the windows in the kitchen open as she walked around making herself something to eat, and at some point, as she was doing this, she heard her phone ring. And so she grabbed it and answered, and she heard the sound of her friend on the other line. But her friend's voice sounded strange. It was strained and very uncomfortable, and she was asking Zivana if she was paying attention to the news right now. Did she have the radio on or the TV? And Zivana was like, "No, why?" And the friend would tell her that all over the news right now, there was this huge, terrible traffic accident that had happened in their town, and unfortunately, Zivana's son, Zoran, who she was waiting for to come home, was apparently apparently involved in this accident. Zavana let out a strangled cry when she heard this, and then just dropped what she was using to make food and turned and ran out the door. And when she did, her neighbor who was outside saw her emerge and yelled out to her, hey, is everything okay? And Zavana, as she literally just continued running towards the road, she basically blurted out to the neighbor that her son was hurt and she was going to the hospital. And this neighbor watched as Zavana just ran down the road, turned the corner, and disappeared. Savannah did not have a car of her own, and so literally she was going to run to the hospital to make sure her son was okay. A little while later, that same neighbor who had just watched Savannah disappear around the corner heard a knock on their door. And so the neighbor went to the door, they opened it up, and they were totally shocked at who they saw standing outside. It was Savannah's son, Zoran, who did not appear to be hurt in any way. But before the neighbor could ask any questions about this, Zoran, who looked visibly confused, said to the neighbor, hey, have you seen my mom? We were supposed to meet and have dinner together, and it's just totally unlike her to disappear without telling me where she was going. The neighbor just stared at Zoran for a second, having no idea what was going on here. And then the neighbor was like, well, wait a minute, Zoran, were you in a car accident? And Zoran's like, no, what are you talking about? And then the neighbor kind of filled Zoran in about how they had seen his mother run outside, and she had mentioned how her son had been in this car accident, and she literally ran to the hospital. Zoran was just as mystified by this as the neighbor was, and so Zoran just grabbed his phone and called the hospital to see if his mother was there. But when the hospital picked up, they would tell Zoran that his mother was not there, she had not been there all day, and two, even though they had heard reports about this car accident in town, there had not been any car accident victims brought to the hospital at all that day. And so by the end of that night, when Zoran really had no idea what had happened to his mom, where she was, or, what was going on with this car accident thing, he just did the only thing he could think to do, which was go to the police and report his mother missing. 9 days later, on May 16th, when still Zavana was missing and the police had no idea what happened to her, there were no new leads, nothing. On this day, a 56-year-old reporter named Vlado Teneski, who actually happened to live not that far away from where Zavana lived, he got a call from one of his police sources. And the source would tell him that Zavana had actually just been found, even though this was not public information, and unfortunately, Zavana was dead. Her body, which had been beaten and strangled and stabbed, had been found wrapped up in plastic and dumped in this illegal dumping area not far from the town's football stadium. The source told Vlado that when her body was searched, they discovered she still had valuables on her person, and so that kind of ruled out the possibility that this was a robbery gone wrong, which was the initial theory about what they were seeing. However, when police had done an initial probe into Zavana's life to figure out who this victim was, they discovered that she was just this poor old cleaning lady who had no enemies to speak of, and so it really just made no sense that she was the victim of such an obviously brutal and intimate murder that was not financially motivated, at least not on the surface. Vlado thanked his source for all the information and then hung up. Vlado's source had sounded really shocked by this murder as he was telling Vlado, but now, as Vlado was sitting here thinking about what he had just been told, he wasn't really shocked as much as he was suspicious. He felt like something just was off about this murder. Maybe Zavana appeared to be this poor old cleaning lady with no enemies, but in reality, maybe that wasn't who she was. Maybe she was leading a secret life that got her killed. Or maybe she had stumbled upon something she was not supposed to see and that got her killed. Vlado had no idea, but he just felt like, there's something off about this and it needs to be investigated. Now, Vlado had a reputation in town for being this very aggressive and kind of fearless journalist who had no problem diving headfirst into some of these really murky stories that could involve corruption or misuse of power, and he would get to the bottom of it, and he would publish these articles where he spoke really critically about the government, about police, about anybody really who was in a position of power. But as a result of conducting himself this way, over his 30-year career, Vlado had been threatened with violence many, many times for things he had written or things he was about to write. But even though Vlado knew this Zavana murder case had the potential to once again put him in hot water with the powers that be, he still felt like it was his responsibility to dive into this thing and get to the truth. So, feeling determined, Vlado grabbed his notebook and pen, and he walked out the front door of his house, and he made the several-minute-long walk over to Zavana's house. And when he got there, her son, Zoran, opened the door, and a few minutes later, Vlado and Zoran were sitting in the kitchen talking about what had happened. Zoran told Vlado all about how he came home and discovered his mom wasn't there, and then he went to the neighbor's house, and they explained how, they had seen Zavana running off to the hospital to go look for Zoran, but Zoran's like, I'm not hurt, I didn't get into a car accident, what's going on here? And as Zoran spoke, Vlado took lots of notes and asked lots of follow-up questions, and by the end of this interview, when Vlado felt like he knew everything there was to know about Zavana, he felt like he actually had a pretty good working theory as to what actually happened to Zavana. And the reason he felt like his theory could be accurate had to do with what Zoran told Vlado his mother did for a living, that she was a cleaning lady. Now, it took Vlado a couple of days to put together his story. He had to go out and interview dozens more people in the neighborhood. But finally, on May 19th, so just 3 days after Zavana was found murdered, Vlado published a story in the newspaper. And the story's explosive headline read, "A Serial Killer Stalks Kisevo." In the story, Vlado says that Zavana's murder was very likely not an isolated killing. Instead, her murder was likely linked to 2 other murders of 2 other women. And these 2 other victims looked an awful lot like Zavana, literally. They were poor, older women who were also cleaning ladies. And so that was why when Vlado was talking to Zoran, and Zoran described how his mother was, what she did for work, what she looked like, that Vlado started to remember these other victims, and he put it all together. The other 2 victims were 64-year-old Mitra Simjanoska, who was murdered in 2005, and the other victim was 56-year-old Lubitsa Lukoska, who was murdered in 2007. Now, Vlado's story was totally explosive, because what he's saying is that there is a serial killer that is on the loose in this town. But this story was also highly explosive because Vlado spoke very critically about the police who were involved in this investigation. Specifically, he pointed out that the 05 and 07 murders of those 2 other women, those had been totally mishandled because arrests had been made in at least one of those cases, and clearly whoever they arrested was innocent here. And so the police just totally dropped the ball, at least in Vlado's opinion. And when the police read Vlado's story, they were very upset at him because he was so critical of them. However, the police also did see that Vlado had managed to uncover a lot of new details from all of his interviews with witnesses and people in the neighborhood that did seem to paint a picture of this potentially really being a serial killer, not individual isolated killings. And so the police, based on Vlado's story, would actually begin investigating a serial killer in their midst. They linked all 3 murders, and they began basically a new investigation. However, at the same time they began this new investigation, Vlado began to notice that he was being tailed all the time by police. He would be out in town doing his job, reporting and interviewing people, and there'd just be a police officer standing somewhere in the distance watching him. But Vlado had anticipated that no matter what, he was likely going to face some sort of blowback from the police.